sitting by the lonesome road. It's about time you're quitting. Life's so tiresome low. You're so sad and lonely. Got no family. Just an old man from some old country. You ain't sad, no chillin'. Ain't none by your side. You left all your women. Ain't you satisfied? Don't just sit there clinging to a memory of a love left in some old country. Da 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 ba da 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 ba 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 dum ba dum ba 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 da 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 way out. Da 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 ba 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 ba. Da 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 da. Don't nobody need you, old man, 'cause nobody called your name. Nobody even whispered, what a doggone shame. So the cold Grim Reaper has no sympathy. You won't see your homeland except through me.
Ja.
Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Hey, Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. War is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way. Bring some understanding here today. Hey, picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so we can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Oh, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Oh, hi, yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, hi, yeah, 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 yeah. Bum, 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 bum. Father, everybody thinks we're wrong. But who are they to judge us? Simply 'cause we look different. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Pick your lines and pick your sides. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so we can see. Oh, what's going on? What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah, hey, ooh, ooh, yay, hey, hey, ooh, bum, 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 bum. Thank you. Pick your lines, pick your signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so we can see. Oh, what's going on? What's going on?
Good evening and welcome. My name is Sue Ellen Lazarus, and I'm the founder and director of the Martha's Vineyard Author Series and Book Festival. Thank you for joining us tonight for our third event, tonight's discussion on the Supreme Court. We're very happy to see so many of you here. Indeed, we just noticed 708 people have signed up and are watching. So whether you're here on the island or just thinking about the island, this is the one way we're all staying connected this year. And we're very pleased that these virtual events are working well, and we're grateful that you are participating. So thank you. I will tell you a little more about our panel in a minute, but a few things first. We're very pleased to announce the latest addition to our lineup. This Thursday, August 13th at 7:30 Eastern Daylight Time will be our fourth and final event. Author Kiese Lehman, activist Barbara Phillips, Pulitzer Prize winner David Blight, and Harvard Law's Ken Mack will join us for a discussion on the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for racial justice. It's an important discussion. It's free, and you could sign up at our Crowdcast channel right here, MV Author Series on Crowdcast, or through the link on our website at mvbookfestival.com. I want to thank our sponsors, the Vineyard Gazette and the Chilmark Town Affairs Council. This free event is possible because of the support of many of you who've made generous contributions. Thank you. If you've not already made a contribution, please consider it tonight. The donate button on your screen makes it really easy, and there it is. Your support not only makes these events possible, it also helps fund next year's book festival, which is also free and will be on August 7th and 8th in Chilmark. Valerie Rosenberg is our Chief Operations Officer. Annie Treitman is our event coordinator. Kate Treitman is our social media master. Vince Chimo is our tech guy. Melissa Patterson of About Signs MV does our design work. Their competence, skill, and dedication are responsible for this event happening tonight and for all of you knowing about it. Music was brought to you by Nanawe Vanderhoop and Evan Hall, with sound engineered by Andy Herr. A few things about the platform we're using. Crowdcast has a few features that allow us to interact with one another during the event. The Buy the Book link below sends you to our local bookstore, Bunch of Grapes, where you can order your copies of tonight's books. Please support the authors, the bookstore, and please buy the books. The Ask a Question button allows you to do just that, ask a question. It also lets you vote on other people's questions. By clicking on the up arrow, you vote on those questions and you bring them up higher on the list. And there's a chat window on the right side of your screen. This is really not to ask author questions. It's to make comments for the rest of the audience to see. And you can use it throughout the event. If it's annoying to you, you can also hide this window. Click on the down arrow on the top right corner of the screen to make it go away. The recording of this event will be available on our website either later tonight or tomorrow morning. And so you can, if you miss anything, want to rewatch anything, or to share it with friends. Now, let me tell you a bit about our extraordinary panel who we're so pleased to have tonight. Ruth Marcus is a syndicated columnist for the Washington Post and deputy editor of the Post's editorial page. She's the author of Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh, and the Conservative Takeover. Marcus has covered every major institution in Washington, including the Supreme Court, the White House, and Congress. In Supreme Ambition, she goes behind the scenes to document how the Republican Party has spent the last 30 years planning a takeover of the Supreme Court to move it to the right, and how Brett Kavanaugh sought to secure his place in that victory. She's joining us tonight from Jackson, Wyoming. So welcome, Ruth. Richard Lazarus teaches environmental law, natural resources law, and Supreme Court advocacy at Harvard Law School. He's represented both governments and environmental groups in 40 Supreme Court cases and presented oral arguments in 14 of those cases. He was a founding director of Georgetown Law's Supreme Court Institute. The Rule of Five is the compelling story of probably the most important environmental law case ever decided by the court, Massachusetts versus EPA, which allowed for the extension of the Clean Air Act to greenhouse gas emissions. He's been a lifelong summer resident of Martha's Vineyard, and no coincidence about the last name, he's also my brother-in-law. He joins us from up the road in Menemsha on the vineyard. And Adam Cohen is an award-winning journalist, lawyer, and author, most recently of Supreme Inequality, the Supreme Court's 50-year battle for a more unjust America. Cohen is a former public interest lawyer who worked with the ACLU and the Southern Poverty Law Center. He served as a member of the New York Times editorial board and is co-editor of the National Review. In Supreme Inequality, Adam looks at how the court has done little to protect the rights of the poor and the disadvantaged, and indeed has contributed to economic inequality in the country. He's joining us from New York City, having just returned from a grueling hiking trip in New Hampshire. And finally, Dahlia Lithwick, our superb moderator. She's Slate's editor and writes the Supreme Court dispatches and jurisprudence columns. She's also the host of the award-winning podcast Amicus, which we think this will be broadcast on later, and she's a contributing editor of Newsweek. Her work on the court has appeared in the Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the New Yorker. She joins us from Ottawa, Canada, from the cold blue north. And we feel pretty sure that this may well be the most informed discussion happening this summer on the Supreme Court. We're very grateful to our panelists and moderators for making it happen. So welcome, panel, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'll turn it over to Dahlia now. There they are.
So, Sue Ellen, thank you so much. Is it? Hold on. Okay, we're going to try again. Thank you so much for having me. We're going to turn this off. Apologies. This is both the joy and the pain of Zoom. Okay, let's do this. Thank you very much for allowing me to host. I want to re-up what I'm going to take this off too. Let's see if we can solve it this way. Okay. Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm going to re-up what Sue Ellen said, which is this is truly one of the most extraordinary panels of people and 3 of truly the finest books about the court that I've read in a long time. So to have everybody not in one place but on one screen is nothing short of miraculous, and I can't wait to have the conversation we're going to have. Just by way of warning, we're going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we will take questions. You should put your questions in the Ask a Question button down at the bottom as advised, and vote on other people's questions. First of all, I want to welcome Ruth and Adam and Richard, and just commend all of you on superb, well-researched, thoughtful, page-turning books about the law. Who could have imagined such a thing could exist? And you've all pulled it off so expertly. And I want to, I think, start by just pointing out these are 3 very different books in very different modes. Adams is a sort of seeking a big, decades-long pan back at big trends at the court. Ruth's is a deep dive on both a confirmation hearing and the conservative legal movement. And Rishi's is a tick-tock of a case from beginning to end. And each of them, I think, cuts at the court in different ways. But I think we could all start by stipulating that the court is a really hard institution to cover because it prides itself on being secretive and oracular and above politics. And if they do it really, really well and they shuffle around in their black robes, we never notice them doing anything at all. So I wondered if just as a precatory conversation, we could talk about what it's like to write about an institution that really hates to be written about. And maybe Ruth, we'll start with you because I know yours is such a sort of pull back the curtain on those red velvet curtains. But can you talk about just the inherent tension about reporting on an institution that really prides itself on making independent work?
I hope. Oh, it sounds so spooky.
Hi guys, sorry about the interruption. Ruth, can you make sure that you only have 1 tab open? I believe what's going on is there's multiple tabs of Crowdcast. And for the rest of you guys, can you just make sure that there's only 1 tab of Crowdcast on any browsers you have? Because I believe when the event started, it's echoing. So let's just check that real quick and then I'll unmute everyone. Thank you all so much for your patience. I know there's mics on and off right now. I'm getting that worked out. So thank you so much. Okay, Ruth, it still sounds like you have feedback. So just make sure that everything is closed except for the single Chrome tab. Richie, I'm going to open your mic up and just make sure that's good to go. We don't have feedback there. Okay, it sounds good. Adam, how are you doing?
Good. Yep.
And Dahlia, it sounds good. So Ruth, just make sure that everything else is closed except for that Chrome tab. And then we'll check that right now.
Okay, I think you were open in both Safari and Chrome for some reason.
I think we're good.
So there you go. Okay.
Sorry, everybody, for the interruption, and let's get on with the show.
All right, here we go. It's not a COVID event unless you have tech problems at the start. I think they were my fault, so sorry about that. Dahlia asked a really good question, and the court is indeed a very frustrating institution to report on. In a lot of ways, my book did not necessarily involve having to succeed, which I hope it succeeded, piercing the veil of the court's processes, though it did do a little bit of that. And I tried to do as much as I could, but it really focused on, first of all, going behind the scenes of the Senate proceedings. And one of the great joys of life as a reporter in Washington is that members, elected officials, love talking to journalists, and as do their staffs. And so I got a whole lot of cooperation in terms of bringing you, I think, a very rich, and thank you for saying page turning, Dahlia, description of what happened behind the scenes at the Kavanaugh hearings. I also was able to tell some about what happened behind the scenes of the Kavanaugh selection and confirmation, both from his perspective, from reporting as much as I could of the people around him, and from the point of view of the Trump administration, which of course never leaks at all, and figuring out how Trump, this very unusual president, made the decision making. So in some ways, maybe of the three of us, I had the easiest job of all, because being able to tell that story didn't hinge on being able to get the justices themselves to open up. Though I do have stories about, for example, Justice Kennedy and the very critical role he played behind the scenes in getting Justice Kavanaugh chosen by the president, and some of what happened during Justice Kavanaugh's first, and will be soon in the paperback version, which is coming, but you should buy the hardback copy, of course. And I know all the people who are watching will. What happened in his second term as well. I don't think you should underplay those Kennedy scoops you got were big scoops. And Richie, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I have the sense that you're in the room talking to judges at the DC circuit. It feels like you had tremendous access, or at least access to people who had access. And I was a little surprised at how much folks were willing to tell you.
I'm such a nice person. Basically, I was really trying to tell behind the scenes in this one big case that Dahlia mentioned, but two different scenes. One was behind the curtains in the Supreme Court, the justices' chambers. The other was behind the scenes with the lawyers who were arguing. And I got a lot of conversations from both of them. I think they thought I would give a fair shake, which is one thing that worked. I had the advantage the case is about a decade old. But talking about the court side, I had one justice talk to me on the record. That was John Paul Stevens. That was a highlight of writing the book, was spending time with Stevens down in Florida, who played an amazingly important role in this case. And people often underestimate the role of advocacy within the court. It's not preordained how they're going to vote. It takes a lot of skill to get and keep those majorities. So that was great, fun. I had some other justices talk to me off the record as well. So I had a handful of justices gave me a pretty good sense of what had happened. One caveat I want to give, because I'm a law professor, I'm not a journalist. I would not talk to any law clerk. I would not contact or talk to any law clerk without permission from the judge or justice first. I just can't do that. That may put me at a disadvantage, but I put my students in those jobs. If any one of them came to me and said, should I talk to someone? I would say, absolutely not. It's a violation of everything you've agreed to. So I couldn't ask them to do something which I would advise them not to do. Fortunately, I did have some authorization from judge. Without that, I wouldn't have talked to them. In the DC circuit, I spoke on the record with just the most amazing judge. I wish he was on the Supreme Court, David Tatel. David Tatel talked to me at length, and I got a very strong sense from Tatel about exactly what happened in the case. If I can, Dahlia, it's okay. I know you mentioned us before, the whole thing about the amazing leakage we've had this year in the Joan Biskupic articles. If I can take just a second, because I think that leakage is more extraordinary for the fact that it happened than its content. There was nothing in the content that was a blockbuster that surprised any of us in terms of what was reported. I think the leakage itself, that was the story, that's a COVID casualty. That's what happens when the justices are not together. That's what broke down. I think that's happened a lot this term. But that leakage is when the justices aren't together and the clerks aren't at the court. I think that's what happened.
So I want to talk about that for a minute, just to be really specific. Joan Biskupic at CNN.com had 4 extraordinary pieces in which she had 3 sources. We don't know who talked to her, but she, I completely agree. I don't think we've seen leaks like this since the Brethren, in terms of information that had to have come from a justice or authorized from a justice. And I'm curious that you think it's a COVID casualty. My instinct says that this was, a lot of these leaks were trying to tell a story about what happened in this past term. Adam, I would turn it over to you, either if you want to talk about these extraordinary scoops that Joan got in the last few weeks, or if you just want to answer sort of that initial question, because yours is a very fundamentally political book, and its intention with, the story I started telling about this, oracular institution, 9 brains in vats, they all come together and ask the framers what's what. Your book is not telling that story. It's a deeply political story. And I guess I could connect it to what Richie just said by saying those leaks are deeply political leaks. The leaks that we're told in the CNN reporting is very much that second narrative about the court as knockdown, drag out, 5-4 institution. So I don't know, there's a question buried in there for you, Adam. I'd leave it to you to figure out what it was.
No, it's a great question, Dahlia. I'm happy to answer it. I think the leaks were political, but I would also say the structure of secrecy of the court is political too. And I think that's something, one of the main points I make in my book is the tension between the court wants to be perceived always as being about law, doing law, making legal decisions. I would say very often, mainly they're doing political things, right? And we see that most during the confirmation and appointment process, where it's clear that Trump is looking for a certain kind of justice, Obama's looking for another kind. We know how political the appointments are, but then everyone has to pretend once they're up there that they're not being political. So secrecy has a real political element to it, right? I mean, there are many aspects to the structure of secrecy, right? They could open up the oral arguments to cameras. They do not do that. They could tell us more about what goes on in conference, where they have actual debates, the way the Senate and House does. They don't do that. There's a strong norm against justices talking about what they're doing. Now, what interest does this serve? It serves the interest of pretending that these decisions are not political, that they're legal. And that's really dangerous, I think, because when you look at the decisions of the last 50 years, in the case of my book, they are doing very political things. They are turning against poor people. They are turning against voters and making it harder for people to vote. They're turning against unions. They're being very political. But the more they make it, white smoke has risen over the court and there's a decision, the less we realize how political it is. Of course, it's part of an even larger superstructure of the way courts present themselves in general, right? The fact that justices wear black robes, right? Senators and Congress members don't wear black robes, that they're up on a bench, that in order to refer to them, we have to begin with the word justice. It's justice or chief justice. They are presenting themselves to the world as being not political. And I'd say that's damaging because they are hiding the politics that we really need to know is what's going on. So that to me is the real phenomenon of the secrecy of the court. And the more leaks we get like Jones, the better I think it is for everybody.
So can I jump in on the COVID casualty? Because I think it's possible that the dissolution of people, the fact that everybody has not been in the same courtroom and courthouse, and not that they're like going from chambers to chambers on a regular basis. It's still a pretty insular place. That may have had an effect, but I think something deeper is going on here, and I'm curious about what all my 3 colleagues think about this, which is that it's a manifestation of the frustration of conservatives with the way this last term has turned out. The subtitle of my book is Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. And I did have to pause as this term concluded to figure out whether that subtitle was correct, because, and surprise, I think it was. I think it was because I think this is still a conservative court with 5 conservative justices, but there were clearly frustrations among conservative justices this term with outcomes in cases that were very important to them and to the country. And I think it's when you have fissures like that, that you know, every institution where there is disagreement breeds leaks for good, or as Adam says, or perhaps for ill, as Richard says. But that's when that happens. So I think COVID may have contributed, but I think what's really fundamentally going on here is a very fierce struggle for control and the soul of the court that's playing itself out.
I really want to, I love that point, Ruth, because both your book and Adam's book have this certain mission accomplished quality, right? We, you know, now there's 5 and they're not 5 squishes, you know, the most moderate of the 5 is a lifelong conservative. So it's over. And yet this term certainly suggested it's not, at least in any immediate way, over. But I wonder if we could just toggle back to something that Adam said, because I think this is the paradox of the court. And it is that you have to always hold those 2 ideas in your head at the same time, that it is both a deeply political institution that is motivated by power and by money and all the other things that motivate our other political institutions, sometimes to its peril. But it is also this other thing. It also is doing something that is not raw politics. And the paradox of this beat, for those of us who cover it, is you have to believe both those things. Because if you believe it's all just 5 R's, 4 D's, whoever appointed you, you may as well go cover the Senate. And the reason I want to push at it a little bit, maybe this is for you, Adam, maybe it's for Richie, is that you stop believing that second story, the court has no legitimacy at all. And in a deep sense, all of us who write and think about the court are aware that by design, the court has neither the purse nor the sword. You know, Congress could turn the lights off tomorrow. There could be, people could just say, no, we just don't choose to abide by this. So the only power the court has is its legitimacy. And something about stripping that away is problematic in a country where that might be the only bulwark we have. So I don't know if that's an unfair thing to ask you to answer for, Adam.
Well, no, I think it's a great point. I think lean a little bit maybe further than you do as you set it up towards thinking it really is very political. And, you know, one of the groups I focus on most of my book is poor people, right? And poor people just never get talked about when we think about the court. But over the last 50 years, the degree to which they just about always lose once we lose the war in court. And I don't think that that's the court interpreting the law. I think that's a group of rich justices who really don't like the poor very much, ruling against the poor out of a gut political instinct. And, you know, it came up even in the Affordable Care Act case, right, where there was so much celebration. Oh my God, Roberts has joined the liberals. We're upholding Obamacare. Hooray, hooray. But they go out of their way on really, I would say, crazy grounds to strike down Medicaid expansion. Anyone who reads that part of the decision, it's making up law really just to remove 5 million poor people who Congress and the president had given Medicaid to, taking away from them. And I don't see this as really principled legal decision making. I see it as mainly politics. And even this term, you know, I don't think we can assume this term means, oh, the conservative takeover isn't real and you exaggerate it. I would say, let's look at this term as being an election year. Roberts has a lot of concerns about getting maybe Trump reelected, maybe the Republicans holding the Senate. Maybe this isn't the year he wants to strike down Roe v. Wade. Maybe this isn't the year he wants to unveil his plan for holding affirmative action to be unconstitutional. So I wouldn't say that just because this isn't the year they did all the things they might do, that they haven't taken over. And some of this may be statistical noise when we see what happens over a longer term.
Oh, and I don't think it's statistical noise so much as just the Chief Justice in particular, since he was the defector and the bad actor, as conservatives saw it. In the majority of cases, he was joined by Justice Gorsuch in the Title VII gay and transgender case. But I think what motivated him was not necessarily something as deep, as directly partisan as I would like to see President Trump reelected. I think that's a really interesting question to know what's actually inside John Roberts' mind on that. But it goes to the tension that Dahlia was talking about, that it's not just we who write about the court who have to hold these two conflicting ideas in our minds, but even more the justices themselves who are involved in the kind of horse trading that leads a Justice Kagan to support, as you say, Adam, taking Medicaid away from millions of poor people, which I'm sure she didn't, that was not her goal. But that simultaneously leads the Chief Justice in a somewhat contorted way to find a way to uphold the Affordable Care Act. I think it's not, to me, the explanation, it may include partisanship, but it more includes the institution and the need that, in particular, the Chief Justice feels to buttress the legitimacy of this institution against these attacks that come from it from both sides.
Dahlia, can I just mention a few things? I'm going to be the one here who's going to defend the second story, which is not going to surprise Dahlia. That's not to the exclusion of something to the first story. As Dahlia said, they're both there, but don't underestimate the second story. It is there too. And certainly those of us who practice before the court, argue before the court, and guess what? Win before the court. We know that second story is there. If you look at the area that I do most of my work, and not exclusively, most environmental law. And so I watch that closely. And that's a very politically contentious area, complete partisan divide on that for the past 20 years, Republicans, Democrats. In the US Supreme Court, we win as many as we lose. This past term, we won a huge case. It's a huge Clean Water Act case, the County of Maui case involving groundwater contamination, reach of the Water Act. We won that case. We won the case 6-3, and the court took that case to go the other way. They took the case reversed. Then they actually looked at it. People did some pretty good lawyering. Industry did some bad lawyering. Environmental justice, Earth Justice did some better lawyering, and we won the case 6-3. That's not unusual. The EME Homer case, a huge case a few years ago involving interstate air pollution. We won that case 6-2, that case. The Laidlaw case, the big environmental standing case, we won that case 6-3 with Rehnquist in the majority. It shows you how I think it's misguided to underestimate how much lawyers make a difference. The advocacy in front of the court and the advocacy within the court. I won a big case a few years ago involving retired railroad workers, and they had asbestosis. And the question was whether they could recover for their fear of cancer or not. And in that case, I won. I won the case, surprised people 5-4. Who was my majority of the case? Who was for these poor, railway workers who were suffering from this real disease? The opinion was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was joined by Justice Souter and Justice Stevens. Who gave me my fourth and fifth vote? Thomas, right, and Scalia. That's not unusual. I won a big hazardous waste case years ago. Who wrote my majority opinion? Justice Scalia. Who dissented? John Paul Stevens. They're much more complicated, I think, than you give them credit for. There are cases, there are high-profile cases where they're untethered, and those cases become more political. But not them all. And just a last point, I want to underscore what Ruth said. The idea that John Roberts voted the way he did in the Louisiana abortion case to help reassure the re-election of Donald Trump, I'm sorry. That's hogwash back in Urbana, Illinois, where I'm from. And I think it's something which undermines the court. When you have all the people, political commentators left and right, and both of them want to propel just story one, and the only story they promote, it's very hard for that second story to ever have any salience with people. And my worry is this: at some point, if all we hear is story one will be the only story. The court is fighting hard for that not to be the case. Not all of them. I think only about 3 or 4 justices who care about the legitimacy of the court in that nonpartisan way. Not all of them.
I want to, just before Adam, I know you want to jump in, but I'm going to add one more layer to this cake, and then I'm going to give you the cake to do what you will. But I think we've talked now about the justices, and we've talked a little bit about how reporters have to handle that tension between the two stories. I think there is another piece in this, and I think it was your last point, Richie, which is the public. And the public desperately needs to believe the oracular story of the court because, that's the Constitution tells us, rightly or wrongly, that is this independent, life-appointed bunch of people who triangulate against the actual law. But also, I think there is this deep aspirational need to think that the court does something that isn't just big business and big politics. And I just want to give you one statistic because I thought it was astounding, and it dovetails with the story Ruth tells in her book, which is, a year and a half ago, the court's public opinion ratings were in the toilet. And one of the reasons that the court didn't hear a whole bunch of the cases they heard this term was to hold them over and let the temperature go down. The poll that I saw last week, astonishingly enough, is that a Gallup poll shows the court's approval rating at the end of this term 58%. This is like a decade-long high. So the American public apparently needs the story about, a moderate centrist court that's not doing raw politics. And they panic when they get the Brett Kavanaugh story that Ruth told. So Adam, you take the cake and run.
Sure. Okay. One thing is, let me say, I would love it if the other story were true. That's the kind of court I would like there to be. I'm just less willing to say that that's what is going on. But what I was going to say, though, is I definitely agree there are going to be areas of law, like environmental law, where the court comes down one way than the other. There are mixes of justice based on ideology. But the area that I find most interesting, I've got a whole chapter on in my book, is election law and democracy law, right? And that is the law that's really most central to who is going to have power in America, the voting process, right? And on that, it's striking. Bush v. Gore, we all saw it. The mask fell down. They said, we're going to put Bush in office, and also you can never cite this case again, ever. So they even said, don't regard it as law. We're now admitting this one time. It is not law. But if you look at the other decisions, voter ID, strict voter ID laws, they uphold that. Big win for the Republican Party. Partisan gerrymandering, they say that they're not going to intervene in that. Big win for the Republican Party. The Voting Rights Act, striking down Section 4 and 5 indirectly, big victory for the Republican Party. If you go through all of these cases, it's amazing the degree in which the conservatives always vote for the thing that will make it most likely the Republicans win elections. And if you try to be legal about it, maybe John Roberts is just, as he said, he wants to be an umpire. That's what he told us in his confirmation hearings. He was not being an umpire in the Voting Rights Act case, right? He found, again, a crazy rationale for saying we're going to rip out the heart of one of the most central laws of the civil rights movement in America. And then the court was deferential to to voter ID laws. So I think that when you look at the law of democracy, which really determines who our leaders will be, who will have power in our country, it's amazing how much it is partisan.
And Ruth, maybe this is a good time to ask you, because I think without a question, your book is telling the story of, without a doubt, this is a decades-long effort that the conservative legal movement, from the Powell memo to Federalist Society to Leonard Leo, this has been a kind of juggernaut, and yet doesn't get where it needs to go at the end of this term. And I wonder if you would reflect for a minute on what I asked Adam, which is after the Kavanaugh hearings, I think that there was a genuine feeling of crisis around the legitimacy of the court. And there was a feeling, I think you write in your book, there's going to be a stain, at least on his time on the court, but also on the institution. A year later, 58%, America loves the court again. Does the conservative legal movement emerge from this saying, like, we won this thing?
Well, I think right now there's a remarkable and still developing crisis going on in the conservative legal movement between those who think that they haven't gone tough enough. I mean, one of the stories that I tell in the book that was very little known at the time is the degree to which some of the stalwarts of the conservative legal movement were worried about whether Brett Kavanaugh, like the Chief Justice, would turn out to be a squish. I tell the story of a guy named Mike Davis, who is now fighting the good fight, as it were, to get more conservative judges confirmed before the end of President Trump's tenure, which I want to say I hope is coming soon. But he was working at the time of Kavanaugh's nomination as the chief nominations counsel for Chuck Grassley, then the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And he mounted this remarkable rogue campaign to deny Brett Kavanaugh the nomination on the grounds that, as he told anybody who would listen, he was too bushy, too much George W. Bush, too swampy, and too chiefy, too much like the Chief Justice. When Kavanaugh was nominated, Mike Davis became his most stalwart defender and really helped push him over the finish line. But the worries that conservatives had about John Roberts, the worries that conservatives had about Brett Kavanaugh that should be assuaged but aren't completely assuaged, reflect the fact that they have been trying to accomplish this goal for 30 plus years. They saw the chance denied them when Bork was defeated. That was a never again moment for the conservative legal movement. And yet they have had slips along the way. They had David Souter, who was supposed to be a home run for conservatives, who turned out to be anything but. They had Anthony Kennedy, who eventually was the third nominee, who did the trick to replace instead of Bork, who turned out to be a disappointment. And I think they are continuing to fight that fight and refine that fight. Democrats have not, since they defeated Bork, have not done nearly as good a job as Republicans of managing to do that again. And I think at the same time that the court has this kind of internal gyroscope. You know, it's not that it follows the election returns, but it doesn't like to get too far out of balance with public opinion. And so I think if you look at some of the decisions from this term, they are actually in line with public opinion. The public believes, whether or not Title VII says it, that it's ridiculous. A majority of the public believes that it's ridiculous and unfair and actually un-American to fire people simply because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. The public wants to, you know, I'm forgetting some of the other cases from the term, but I do think that that internal gyroscope has been a piece of what has frustrated the conservative legal movement in being able to declare 100% absolute victory.
Rich?
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts. One is thinking about Adam said, I would never deny Bush v. Gore was a political decision. I think that's the court at its worst in time. And that was really demoralizing for those of us who practiced before the court. And I know some people actually said, I'm not here to practice before them again after that. But I think that's an example of the court crashing. That's what happens if you accept a case for review on Friday, you hear argument on Monday, and you issue an opinion on Tuesday. And that's what happened in that case. Then you don't have a court acting like a court. They're not deliberating, not discussing. They're not actually having conferences. They're not actually able to be convinced and think things through. They're just acting by instinct. So that was a terrible decision. And I think we see some hints of that right now. To the extent the court has resurrected its emergency jurisdiction, I think the court is not acting smartly or like justices right now on all those emergency cases. I also would never say that Chief Justice Roberts isn't a conservative. He is deeply conservative. He's not a moderate. I mean, he looks moderate right now because the Trump administration is so crazy extreme. So if you throw these shoddy legal arguments at him, he'll know he's going to reject them because he has limits. So like the DACA case or the Census Bureau case, he's going to say there's no law there. If Louisiana, has the audacity to throw back at the court the same law that the court struck down a few years ago from Texas, even though he's in dissent, he's going to say, no, you can't do that. That's too much. The voting rights, I think that's a good example. They're not, I don't think they're every area. I think Voting Rights Act, they tend to be more political. I think you overstayed just a little bit. The voter ID law, if I remember correctly, Indiana, that was a case written by John Paul Stevens, a big liberal from the court. So they're more complicated than one thinks. I think what's interesting about what you see the Chief Justice doing, because he cares about the legitimacy of the court. He wants to send that message, not because he's trying to sneak through the election so he can come back. He actually believes in it. What he says is actually what he believes there. What's interesting is the name of my book is The Rule of Five. That's Justice Brennan's famous rule about the most important rule of federal constitutional law is it takes 5 justices for a majority. Roberts believes in the rule of 7. Or he believes in the rule of 6. He believes if the court is ruling 5-4 in cases, particularly along apparently partisan lines, that's a disaster for the court. He doesn't want it. He's working very hard not to have that happen. He's trying to get 6-3s. He's trying to get 7-2s. If he gets a conservative justice to vote in a more liberal way, or a liberal justice to vote in a more conservative way, he gives them the opinion assignment. That's why you see Gorsuch writing Bostock, the gay rights case. He's working hard, but he's trying to have them decide less. And as he said in one of the addresses first here, and he wants that 7-2. And he got it. He got a bunch of 7-2s. He worked hard. He got some 6-3s. And he's not doing it just because he's being maniacal and manipulative. And once the election happens, I'm sorry, he's just not doing that. He's conservative. Most of the opinions this term were conservative. They won that 5-4. They won a lot. They didn't win some at the end. They lost some big high-profile ones. But he's not being some sort of Machiavellian. How can he manipulate things? He actually believes the court needs to look legitimate, and I think Justices Breyer and Justice Kagan believe so too.
Yeah, I mean, I think one way to think of it is there's 2 axes here. There's a left-right axis, and then there's a concern for legitimacy axis. And I think it's fairly clear that the Chief Justice, I think Breyer and Kagan, I actually think Kavanaugh and Gorsuch on the other side are also operating on that second axis. But I want, Adam, if you would, and I just want to tell folks we're going to start taking questions in a minute. So pop your question in the Ask a Question box. But Adam, I want you to respond to what Ruth is describing as, this decades-long enthusiasm gap where there is a conservative legal movement that is laser focused. It is phenomenally well financed with, by the way, dark money that is not, there's no analog on the left. There is also a sort of checked out gap that you describe. I mean, I think what you really identify in your book is the degree to which, right or wrong, liberals still kind of think we're in the Warren Court era and still kind of think, okay, now the median justice is Sandra Day O'Connor, but she's basically, a liberal. And then it's Anthony Kennedy far to the right of Sandra Day O'Connor, but now he's basically a liberal. And now the story I think we're telling this summer is John Roberts. So we keep hyper focusing on the median justice and then telling a story about how that person has drifted left or evolved. And that's not what you're describing. You're saying the Warren Court era was a blip. And since then, we've seen something else, but that somehow court watchers, with very few exceptions, are not seeing that rightward drift, that everyone is replaced by someone to their right and the median has torqued to the right. So can you talk about that a little bit? How we've misapprehended what's happened to the court?
Sure. I think there are 2 aspects to it. It's a great question. One is, I think that's exactly right, that liberals don't realize just how much damage the modern court has been doing to the liberal cause. So one aspect of that that is so important is what was done with campaign finance, right? I mean, after Watergate, Congress passed actually a very good campaign finance law that the DC Circuit upheld on very reasonable grounds. The Supreme Court strikes it down, beginning a process of striking down over and over and over again any reasonable attempts by Congress and state legislators to just try to keep special interest money from dominating our politics, something that Americans do not want. And we talk about the court respecting popular will. Well, not on this issue. Citizens United was so wildly unpopular, a majority of Republicans were outraged by it. So that's one huge loss. I mean, it's one area of law, but it affects everything. Once you say we're going to allow the floodgates of money to buy Congress and buy the state legislatures, you've lost on union law, you've lost on worker protections, you've lost on welfare law, everything. So that's one area that we've lost so much since the Warren Court, but also in so many other areas. In my book, I talk about how the court was becoming very close to recognizing real rights for the poor, the way we have rights for racial minorities and for religious minorities. We would have a very different America there. And then another area is what the court was able to do to education law, where we were so close to striking down unequal funding of school districts, rich and poor school districts. And the only reason the court was able to strike it down 5-4, to uphold unequal funding 5-4 was, and I tell the story in the book, Nixon driving Abe Fortas off the court, using dirty tricks and all kinds of manipulations, getting one extra conservative seat. And because of that, the liberals lost the school equalization, and then the next year Milliken, which would have actually allowed required states to integrate between urban and suburban districts. So much of that is lost, but it's been lost so long ago that, as you say, right now we're focusing on, the just incremental, where is the swing justice? The other thing I want to say, though, is that there's also a procedural aspect, which is, Will Rogers famously said, "I'm not a member of an organized political party, I'm a Democrat." And that doesn't apply, that applies more to the Supreme Court than anywhere else, right? I mean, the Republicans, the conservatives have been so good about building a conservative majority, which Nixon did very methodically, and then holding on to it. So we see it with driving Abe Fortas off the court. We see it with Anthony Kennedy resigning when he's apparently in very good health, but it's the last moment he knows a Republican president will for sure have a Republican Senate to confirm a successor. Ruth Bader Ginsburg did not retire under Obama. Stephen Breyer did not do that either. And then, just as this conservative majority we've lived with for 50 years was built by Nixon stealing Abe Fortas' seat, lo and behold, Mitch McConnell steals the Merrick Garland seat as well, right? So the Republicans play a blood sport of, we are going to control this court. We're never going to take our eye off the ball. The Democrats are not doing that, and they need to start doing it.
Ruth, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, Richard made this point about Trump and how Trump is sort of in the midst of everything right now. And certainly, we're seeing unprecedented Justice Department action that we've never seen, a Justice Department flipping sides on cases like we've never seen before. Justice Department now wanting to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act in the midst of a pandemic. But also, I think Richie flipped it at this, but it's important, these bad lawyers making bad arguments and losing because they just either didn't take the time or care enough to, brief things correctly, to follow the, APA, all sorts of times that if this had been lawyered correctly, they would be getting outcomes they want. And Trump cast such a shadow over your book. I think that it is almost futile to try to parse which justices like Trump and which don't, and who supports the greater Trump project and who doesn't. But I guess I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Anthony Kennedy and Donald Trump, because I have to say, I was the dork who kept writing over and over again that Anthony Kennedy, who prizes dignity and who prizes decorum and who prizes talking to each other in civility. I mean, those were his stations of the cross, right? Dignity, civility, decorum. It turns out he was working the refs the whole time to get Brett Kavanaugh. I wonder, were you surprised, or did you know that there was this Justice Kennedy, Donald Trump axis?
I was more surprised than than that I knew before going into this. If you look at it from the outside, they are the oddest Republican couple that you can imagine, Justice Kennedy and President Trump. Justice Kennedy is the ultimate country club Republican. He prizes all those things that you said, civility, decency. You would think that he would be repelled by President Trump and all that he's brought to the Republican Party. But at the same time, it's really important to understand that whatever kind of Republican Justice Kennedy is, he's still a Republican. He wanted and he was determined. He wasn't in great health, and that was a piece of it. Adam, he really was, felt like he was cognitively fading. But more than that, he understood that he wanted to make sure that his seat was filled by a Republican in a way that Justice Ginsburg made a different and regrettable choice. But at the same time, he managed to forge this odd couple relationship with the president, partly through the fact that their children are friends and partly by kind of cozying up to him. And one of the stories that I tell in the book has to do with Justice Kennedy on the day that he was swearing in his former clerk, Neil Gorsuch, to join him on the court, asking for some time alone with the president and saying, hey, you developed this list of potential justices that he didn't say this, but that list was instrumental, I believe, in helping Donald Trump get elected. There's somebody missing from your list, and you might want to think about putting him on there. This is in April of 2017. In November of 2017, guess who turns up on that list? The very person who Justice Kennedy was suggesting to the president, one Brett Kavanaugh, a former Kennedy clerk. That gave Justice Kennedy the confidence that he would be replaced by somebody he thought was a like person on the court, though it's absolutely clear now, and it will be clearer in half a dozen and a dozen years, that Justice Kavanaugh is no Justice Kennedy.
Richard?
Yeah, it's just a quick thing. I follow this stuff obsessively like everyone else. I watched the Kavanaugh hearings. I knew a lot of what was going on behind the scenes. I knew about Christine Blasey Ford about 5 weeks before she came out. I learned a huge amount from Ruth's book.
Thank you.
It was just amazing how much I learned from that book and the whole Kennedy, the role. I was sure Kennedy would have such an antipathy for Trump, and I thought and also I'll say a lot of books about the court aren't fair. It was a really fair, balanced account.
We can end now. That was lovely.
Yeah, no, what? It's really a good book.
Thank you.
I want to before we take questions, Richie, if it's okay with you, I want to ask you one, because I need to ask the aspirational question. So I'm going to you as my my hope whisperer. But your book is, in a deep way, it's about the power of oral advocacy, the power of good lawyering. It's a little bit the dismaying story of huge teams of lawyers with complicated work relationships. But bracket that, I wondered if, just to maybe take us out of this discussion part on a high note, because we have been, I think, mired in a pretty political discussion. I think one of the things I took away from your book was good lawyering really matters. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do it quickly because I know we got questions to get to. No, this is a case, Supreme Court, biggest environmental law case ever decided. Let's call this environmental law's Brown v. Board of Education. It deals with the most important issue of our time, for at least for environmental, and that's climate change. And the country had been done nothing on it for decades, Democrat and Republican. It was bipartisan neglect of the issue, including during Clinton-Gore for 8 years. So this is a case which was brought by this one little guy at the beginning, Joe Mendelson, in a little townhouse in Washington, D.C., where everyone tried to get him to stop bringing the case because they thought it was a bad strategy. And ends up in the United States Supreme Court. It was a case which never should have granted review at all. At every traditional indicia against the Supreme Court granted review, And the court did, and that was really good lawyering, actually by a law professor, former colleague of mine, Lisa Heinzman, was the primary author of the draft. And it took a really good brief to know how to frame the question. And then before the justices themselves, they could easily have lost this case. It was a high-risk roll of the dice, that's what they called it, which is why many people didn't want them to take it to the court, because they thought they would lose before these conservative justices in that case, and it would have set back the climate movement. But what they did in the case, as you see, is they realized the best environmental lawyers are not the best environmentalists, they're the best lawyers. So they figured out how to frame this case in a way that would win 5 justices, the rule of 5. And that was not to make it about climate change, to make it about an administrative law question, to make it about something where you can count to 5, a possible 5 votes. So they made it non-environmental. They made it about administrative law. That's what makes justices' hearts go pitter-patter, administrative law. So they framed it in a way they would care about, and they pitched it for a little teeny win. And they got it just right. And if they'd blown it, they could have lost huge. And they just won with that 5th vote, with Justice Stevens having to go through 8 drafts to get and keep that 5th vote. And then Justice Stevens got that 5th vote. That's why I call him the Jedi Master, the octogenarian Jedi Master at the court. But then he wrote it big. He wrote it like Skelly Wright, who was this famous DC Circuit judge from the 70s. He wrote it big. And so he turned it into this big case once he had his 5 votes. And I talked to Stevens about that in Florida. He said, sometimes I write to lawyers, sometimes I write to the casebook, sometimes I write to the American people. And Stevens was fervently frustrated that Republicans, his party, was not taking climate seriously. So it's a case of masterful lawyering, an incredible oral argument by the Massachusetts Attorney General's office, a guy named Jim Milkey. And it's a case where they won, and they won by good lawyering. And it's a hopeful case, but I see it happen much more than I think people realize. Good lawyering makes a difference before the justices, and good lawyering within the court makes a difference. The court these days, they're far more conservative than I wish they were. Their one saving grace is that most of them are really good lawyers. They're really good lawyers. They're not incompetence up there. They're actually 9. All 9 are really smart lawyers.
Can I say one sentence before we get to the question? Mm-hmm. So good lawyering does matter, but I think it's really important for us to understand that it has its limits. It has its limits not just at the Supreme Court, but in the lower federal courts, which we do not pay enough attention to, and where the Trump transformation and the addition of so many federal appeals court judges is going to make a huge difference. And even before Trump took office, the fact of watching the cases on the Affordable Care Act develop, and you could, by knowing the composition of the panel and who appointed what president appointed the judges on the panel, you could almost predict the outcome in case after case after case. Shows, I really take your argument, Richard, but I also think it has really dramatic and depressing limits to it.
I don't disagree.
And on a high note.
I mean, I think we can agree that, the one time that Chief Justice Roberts really smacked back at Donald Trump was when Donald Trump was saying, Obama judges and Trump judges, and the Chief Justice, in his very understated way, said there's no such thing as Trump justices and Obama justices. And of course, there are. Again, that's back to the 2 stories that we started with. The question we've got the most of are just a lot of people wanting to talk about structural court reform. What are the panelists thinking about, whether it's, court expansion or term limits, or, any number of the semi-quasi-constitutional strategies that are being floated if Democrats were to win the Senate. Does anybody want to weigh in on the possibility of serious court reform? And in part, I think, just remembering what Ruth just said, Donald Trump has seated more than 200 judges in 3.5 years, and flipped 3 circuit courts. And we saw the 8th Circuit on Friday overrule Whole Women's Health in an abortion case, just kind of ignoring June Medical. So it's important to realize the court heard 53 merits opinions and turned away thousands of others. Those courts those are resolved in the federal appeals courts. Does anyone want to talk about the possibility of major structural court reform?
Well, I'll jump in. I think that it's very, very nerve-wracking. I am a sort of left of center, but centrist. I was arguing when Harry Reid got rid of the filibuster for appeals court judges and lower court judges. I knew what was coming. I knew it was coming to the Supreme Court. And what this produces is judges who can get 50 votes, not who can get 60 votes. And that creates judges on the extremes and not in the center. And that is not a good thing. But we are where we are. I think the potential for dramatic and I think unwise changes at the court really depends on the health of Justice Ginsburg. If, God forbid, something happens to Justice Ginsburg before the election or even after the election, because after the theft of what I liked, I think it was you, Adam, who called it the Merrick Garland seat. I will call it that till the end of time. No holds barred. If a vacancy is created, if the vacancy is filled, and I would hold out hope that at a certain point the vacancy would not be filled because enough Republican senators would recognize the disastrous consequences of that. But if a vacancy happened and if a vacancy were filled, there is nothing that would stop Democrats. And I would have a hard time arguing with them to control themselves in that circumstance from doing something that I think would be dramatically unwise, like expanding the court. I do think that there are court changes, minor things like cameras, or even more minor things like let's have real-time broadcasts of oral arguments, audio broadcasts of oral arguments. It doesn't hurt anyone. It only educates the public. I'm in favor of term limits, but that more likely than not requires a constitutional amendment. That would be much healthier for the process and much healthier for the court. But we could have Armageddon under bet if the worst were to happen.
Richard?
Yeah, I realize it's less interesting if we agree than if we disagree, but I actually am going to agree completely with what Ruth said. That's exactly my diagnosis. I think it'd be a very bad thing if we expand the court. Obviously, the court happened a lot in the 19th century. It started at 6 originally, then it was 7, then it was 8, then it was 9, then it was 10, then back to 9. They did a lot of that, but I don't trust this these days. If we go down that path, I think before we know it, we're going to have 25, 30, 40 justices on the court going back and forth. So I think it's a bad idea, terrible idea. So does Ruth Bader Ginsburg. With that said, just like Ruth thought, this is what I think. If there's an opening, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg for some reason has to resign from the court, or is not on the court, and it happens before January 3rd, which is when the Senate would theory change, Mitch McConnell, I think, would try to confirm someone in 2 hours. And if he does that, I would have a hard time telling the Democrats if they had the Senate and the White House, and actually I very much hope they have the Senate and the White House, I had a very hard time saying they weren't justified in adding 2 seats to the court.
How about you, Adam? I feel like, we have a majority Senate that by 51 votes is seating people who've had 7 minutes of legal experience, often in the blogging industry, never having set foot in a courtroom. I actually think I might be in the minority here in that I think there is a huge structural problem that transcends whether or not Ruth Bader Ginsburg is replaced, on January 1st.
I agree. I think the system is broken for the reasons you described. It's harder to know what the answer is, but I think we should look into it. And maybe the next step, if Biden is elected, is some kind of a commission that looks into all of these options, what we could do with term limits, what we could do that doesn't require a constitutional amendment, because I don't think we'll get a constitutional amendment. But so I'm open to a robust discussion of it. But the other thing I'd say is I think just talking about things like court packing is probably good, because I know that Richie's going to say that Roberts is very principled and doesn't care about the election, doesn't care about anything but his very pure heart. But I think that when they hear that the Democrats, if they get mad enough, may start packing the court, I think that will push them to the center.
I would say, by the way, he has a very pure heart, but he would care about packing the court. That's a different issue than whether he's trying to get Donald Trump reelected.
And it may pull him to the center, is all I'm saying.
Adam, a question here about whether this court might take seriously the big criminal justice, racial justice, sort of post-George Floyd issues, qualified immunity, how we are policing. Is there any reason to believe that the court might get in lockstep with this new mood in the country about how we are policing and incarcerating?
Boy, I mean, it comes down to what, both Richie and Justice Brennan said, the rule of five, right? So, I mean, they should, right? Because as Ruth has said, there's a movement going on. There's something happening in the country. How do we get 5 votes behind that? Do we get a Gorsuch, or do we get Justice Roberts? I'm skeptical, but it also ties into what you said about how much the liberals have already lost. Because if you look back historically, there was a perfect case in early 2000s challenging 3 strikes and you're out. And the case was so extreme. A guy who shoplifted some children's videos and gets sent to jail for 50 years to life, right? And that was the moment when the court should have said, hey, we need to start taking, over sentencing and over incarceration seriously. And terribly, at almost the exact same moment they were doing that, the court was striking down punitive damages against corporations, saying that due process requires that punitive damages against corporations be quite low. But they didn't take that step and say, we're not going to allow, the Eighth Amendment doesn't allow sending someone to jail for 50 years to life for taking some children's videos. So much of this has been lost. The question is, where do we find that 5th vote? Because it's something that has to happen.
Richard?
Yeah, just a quick thought. I don't think the 5th vote is here right now. This is a court which does have a deep 5-justice majority, which is very harsh in the criminal justice context. A few anomalies here and there which surprise us, or at least uplift us, but mostly it's a very conservative court. Not as conservative as Justice Thomas, but deeply conservative. So I think the short answer to your question, Dahlia, is I don't think there's enough has happened yet. But here's the one sliver of chance that it might at some point in the not too distant future. This goes to what Ruth was talking about a moment ago. I think the court's opinion in Bostock, the gay rights and transgender case, is extraordinary. There's no way the justices would have voted that way 10 years ago. The number of courts of appeals and liberal progressive judges who had voted on that issue for decades all voted the other way, that there was no coverage under that same language. What changed, as Ruth said, was the country changed. The country changed enough that you actually could have that case, the Bostock case, right, be a 6-3 with both Kavanaugh and the chief joining more liberals. And I think that's a reflection of what happened in the country.
Gorsuch and the chief.
What?
Gorsuch and the chief.
You're right, Gorsuch. Yeah. Gorsuch wrote the opinion. Thank you. So, I mean, Kavanaugh should have voted.
I want you to know how much he likes it.
I will say Kavanaugh should have voted that way on that one. But it was 6-3, and that was the country that moved. Because all the judges, liberal too, had voted the other way. So maybe, right? Maybe, but I don't think we're there yet. I think it takes a lot to get the current conservatives on the court to rethink the social justice issues as much as they should. And I'm not optimistic they're there yet.
Well, one really fascinating thing is that the court had the opportunity in the midst of all of this to take a qualified immunity case. And this wouldn't have been that hard for it. There were a number of cases there. It is not actually a clear left-right issue. Justice Thomas has raised questions about qualified immunity. Justice Scalia raised questions about qualified immunity. It had captured the public's imagination. And yet, so my explanation for why the court moves at certain times doesn't hold weight there. Maybe we will see it happen. at the same time, I do actually share the belief that this is going to be a long time coming to see the court respond to what we've seen in the streets. For example, you look at some of the emergency actions where the conservative justices are very worked up about restrictions on religious institutions and on church gatherings in particular. But they're a lot less worked up when it comes to whether prisons are being conducted safely for people. And I think really fundamentally, the Chief Justice believes what the Chief Justice said, which is the way to get over race is to stop paying attention to race. And that is out of step with the conversation we're having in the country right now. But I don't think that's one where he's going to be tacking in any different direction anytime soon or ever.
Another example is the Second Amendment cases, which the court had almost 24 teed up that they could have taken for next term. There's definitely an appetite, I think, on the part of 4 conservative justices to expand gun rights under Heller, and somebody blinked there. And I think it's the same problem where the court is both out of step with the American public on some of these gun rights questions, but doesn't know how to get in step. And so they sort of defer it until something different happens.
Blinken is good on that one, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's the same. It's the flip of the same problem. I just want to ask a question that relates to Judge Stephen F. Williams on the DC Circuit, died of COVID. There's a question about whether there's going to be a fight to replace him. My understanding is he had taken senior status. So that's not a seat that is available that Mitch McConnell can jam a person into that seat, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There is a judge on that court who people are worried may be about to announce that they're leaving in order to create an opening. And that is under a lot of pressure, and there's signs based on clerks not getting jobs that opening might happen. If it does, then Mitch McConnell will get to make an effort to jam one through.
I want to give each of you just 10, 20 seconds to tell us something that you're hopeful about going into either the next term or the election. I know that might be like scraped off the bottom of your shoe, but something that you feel okay about in terms of the court and the law and the rule of law. Ruth, you want to start?
Oh, well, this was not a question that I was prepared for.
I'm sorry.
I guess this term, I feel hopeful in the sense that this term was a surprise. And even though I truly do believe that this is a conservative court that will disappoint me for years to come, I think that we saw in the Bostic case, the gay rights case, the upside of textualism or the malleability of textualism. And so I'm much more happy, if not optimistic, now than I was, say, in mid-June.
Richie?
Well, my hope for is all I think about. I have a little countdown clock until the inauguration, January 20th of 2021, that I can consult anytime. And that is my hope, is that Donald Trump is no longer in the White House. I think he's a virus himself, and I'm looking forward to him no longer being there. One thing related to the court that I found hopeful is that, at least so far, Joe Biden hasn't tried to replicate what Donald Trump did. I thought it was, on many counts, but I thought it was awful for the court that Donald Trump held up a list of people he would put on the court. And he said, this is the list. And people voted for him, a whole bunch of evangelical, because of his list. That's a disaster for the court. It's very hard for the court to maintain not being political. The other two branches are going to treat them as exclusively political. I'm glad Biden hasn't done that yet. He's had a lot of pressure. People have said, produce your list. He hasn't done it yet. And I think that's a positive thing for the country.
How about you, Adam?
Well, such a hard question for me because I'm so unrelentingly pessimistic, but I actually have two. One is that although I think the last 50 years have been decades in which the court has ruled against the poor and in favor of the rich and all that. The phenomenon that Rich mentioned is also true, that on certain issues, particularly social issues, the court has done a lot better. So during the Berger years, when the court was actually turning against the Warren Court, that's when women's rights really came to the fore constitutionally. And I think we're seeing it again with gay rights now, and that's an amazing thing. And I think we may see that on other social issues, so that's very positive. A second thing I'd say is, even though I think the history of the court is one of a lot of bad stuff, and then the blip, as you call it, of the Warren Court, I do believe that in life, pendulums do go back and forth. And if Biden were to win, and if there were to be 8 years of a Democratic president, I think that would be enough time for the court to change again and maybe begin to get something like another Warren Court. So I think there's some hope for that.
Just one quick.
Yeah.
It's very quick, and that is another hopeful thing from a purely parochial perspective as a professor at the Harvard Law School. I find it hopeful that myself, Ruth, and Adam all graduated from Harvard Law School.
And my daughter's going to be a 1L. We're moving
Maybe
in the fall. So
maybe she's in my section.
Is listening.
Well, I'm going to say a hopeful thing that I think is a version of maybe what Adam said, but I'll say it anyway, because this year, my advice to myself is what I call the when you're camping in Yellowstone rule, which is when you see a bear, they tell you your job is to look larger than you are, which always struck me as sort of like ontologically and existentially not possible. But I do think that this term taught me that actually the court sees us when we're watching and cares about what we think and modulates some of its more extreme conduct in response to us looking like we care. And there are 746 people who have stayed on longer than they should have. Not one of them has dropped out because I think people care. And to me, that gives me really immense hope that I think people being in conversation about the court, that it's not an oracular, Greek temple on a hilltop, but it's something that we need to engage with in really deep ways, the way all three of you have done this year. I think that gives me hope because I think the court responds. So Ruth, Richard, Adam, thank you so very much for your tremendous work, for this astonishing conversation. Folks out there, if you have not already done so, please go to the Bunch of Grapes link or to your own local bookstore and buy Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus, then buy The Rule of Five by Richard Lazarus, and then also buy, in no particular order you should do this, Supreme Injustice by Adam Cohen. You will be happy that you did, and clearly Harvard Law School will be happy that you did too. I want to thank everyone in the audience and the organizers for joining us for this third event of the 2020 Martha's Vineyard Author Series. This Thursday, August 13th, the series will host an important and timely discussion on some of what we touched on today, Black Lives Matter and the fight for racial justice, with Kiese Lehman, author of the astonishing memoir, Heavy, David Blight, Pulitzer Prize-winning author of Frederick Douglass, Barbara Phillips, professor at the University of Mississippi School of Law, and it will be moderated by Kenneth Mack, professor at Harvard Law School. Please check mvbookfestival.com for details and to register. We wish you all good health, stay well, wash your hands, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Have a good summer.
Dahlia.
Thank you, Dahlia.
You old man sitting by the lonesome road. It's about time you're quitting. Life's so tiresome low. You're so sad and lonely. Got no family. Just an old man from some old country. You ain't sad, no chillin', ain't none by your side. You left all your women Ain't you satisfied? Don't just sit there clinging to a memory of a love left in some old country. Da da da. Da da ba da da dum da dum. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 ba. Ba dum ba dum dum. Ba 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 ba. Ba 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 da da da. Way out. Da 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 ba bye ba 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 bye. Da 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 da. Don't nobody need you, old man, 'cause nobody called your name. Nobody even whispered, what a doggone shame. So the cold Grim Reaper has no sympathy. You won't see your homeland set through me. Mother, mother, there's too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Hey, Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. War is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way. Bring some understanding here today. Hey, picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so we can see what's going on. Yeah, what's going on? Oh, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. Oh, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Ooh, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Bum, 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 bum. Father, everybody thinks we're wrong, but who are they to judge us? Simply 'cause we look different. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Picket lines and picket signs. Don't punish me with brutality. Come on, talk to me so we can see what's going on. What's going on? Yeah, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Yeah. Hey.